Hey there folks, Wrel here. Today we're going to be talking about the current state of the game as it relates to player acquisition and retention, and what kinds of changes can be made to create vast impacts with minimal effort. There are a number of different areas that we're going to touch on, so we're just going to throw them all into categories and then break them down. Regarding the new player experience, with the addition of Cold Tier, first time events, and the new player directive line, you'll have a great start for easing new players into the game. Cold Tier, in my opinion, is what we've needed for the past year and a half or so. Players on the live server are just too experienced to not be able to give a new player a more gradual introduction to the game. We beat the tar out of these guys relentlessly, and that's before they've even figured out who or what to shoot at. Now back in the day, whenever that was, most players were just as clueless and just as excited as you and I were about the game, so sticking with it was much easier, and Cold Tier is basically a way that newer players can relive that. But as soon as you step out of the kiddie pool and into the shark tank, you've still got a lot of the same problems that we've always had. The first and most notable of which is, where do I go and what do I do? If you're not following the foot zerg from one base to the next, the easiest way to find a fight is to press instant action. Unfortunately, instant action is still broken. It seems to be getting better because at least when you get instant action on a base that you're defending, it drops you right onto your spawn point, but it still needs work. I'm not going to talk about this much because A, I think we all know the harm that it can do, and B, the PlayStation 4 version of the game actually has a sort of fight area system that I'm kind of wondering if it will get ported over to the PC. And if it does, that should alleviate a lot of the frustrations and downtime that newer players have when it comes to answering that question. So this is all stuff that you may have experienced, may have heard about from one place or another, but it's important to kind of get it out of the way so that we can frame the discussion for what else we can do moving forward. The second problem with the new player experience is that we aren't given the proper tools right at the beginning of the game. If you think about it, what tools does a new player have to counter air vehicles when they just start out? They have a max unit with one burster arm and the other one for 1000 certifications, and that's it. Why does a new player have nothing in their utility slot? Or why do they not have a 1x reflex sight on their default weapons? And why are all of their vehicles stripped to the bare bones? The funny thing here is that it actually used to be much worse than this. New players had no suit slot, you couldn't get a reflex sight for 5 certifications, loadouts had no names to indicate what the class was for or what it should be doing. You kind of just experimented by spending your certifications in various places, or you went to go watch videos on YouTube, or you just played the hand that you were dealt. The guidance wasn't, and still isn't, there in a lot of respects. I've given up hope that this game will ever have the flat horizontal progression that I think it truly deserves, but there are still ways to change what we have right now to make the game better for players to begin with. So here's how we could change things for the better. Firstly, set up all of the starter weapons with attachments by default. All non-sniper, non-shotguns get a 1x reflex. You can give all LMGs and assault rifles a forward grip. You give all carbines a laser sight. And you give shotguns extended magazines. Why, you may ask? It's for a few different reasons. The first is that by giving players the default iron sights, you immediately put them at a disadvantage. And while it may seem like, woohoo, 5 certifications for an optic, that's cheap, I love it, those players don't actually know what an optic will do for them because they have no frame of reference, or they'll spend those certs somewhere else. Secondly, by giving default weapon attachments, you are emphasizing the role of that weapon, while giving the player something to equip and unequip just to experiment with, instead of having to dump 100 certifications into something just to find that out. The base weapons should be considered a free gift to the new players and a platform to grow on and experiment with. This will allow them to make more informed decisions about certification purchases in the future, and suit slots should be treated the same way. If the default loadout gives them an advanced shield capacitor in their suit slot just to begin with, then give them maxed rank advanced shield capacitor. Don't just give them the first rank and call it quits. Suit slots are not universal unlocks, so if you use them to emphasize the roles of each class, say you have nano armor on the heavy assault loadout and an adrenaline pump on your light assault loadout, then that player will know what kinds of benefits those suit slots can provide at maximum strength, and be more inclined to experiment with them on their other classes and loadouts. But more importantly is that it puts them in immediate contest with players who have spent an infinite number of hours in the game, but only with your default loadout. It will never put their skill level on par, but it will help erase the stigma of pay to win, and it'll give a new player a better learning atmosphere right from the very start. Also, as a side note for the NC, the Gauss Saw is an expensive weapon to get up to par, and it's a terrible thing to learn on. My vote would personally be for the Gauss Saw S with the forward grip because it has 75 rounds, so it'd be between the VS and the TR LMGs in terms of magazine size. But symmetry aside, the GD22S is a great choice too, and probably is the better option all around. To build on the thought of having free unlocks, new heavy assaults should be given the ground-to-air lock-on launchers by default, not the default dumbfires. The reason for that is new players have no way of dealing with air outside of their standard dumbfire, which is a high skill weapon when it comes to anti-air duty in the first place, and their one-armed burster max. Now, I know that people won't be too happy about there being more lock-ons around, but A, my interests are here to help the new player, and B, ground-to-air lock-ons are actually in a pretty good place right now, thanks to the tracking changes that were made a while back. Dumbfires should then get their price set to either 250 certifications or 100 certifications, so that a new player can trade up for more damage early on. Beyond that, use each class's utility slot to help emphasize their role in the game. So for heavy assaults, you give them a medical kit and then you equip it, and yes, it should still be unlocked for all classes. Next, you give light assaults a single brick of C4, and then you make the second one cost 200 certifications instead of 500. Then you give infiltrators their first proximity mine, you give engineers their first anti-tank mine, and lastly, you give combat medics a restoration kit, for lack of better alternatives. Also, if that's the case, you should probably buff restoration kits by doubling their duration, because they're not so amazing right now. But from here, you have each class with an emphasis on a certain job, with the option to either equip a medical or a restoration kit on any class if they so choose. This is important. And why is it important? Because when it comes to dealing with vehicles or max units or defending a base, we don't have any tools to actually do that, save for the dumbfire rocket launcher and our primary weapon. Why put new players in front of a cert wall when they can't effectively help their team? Not to mention, by giving new players access to utility slot items, you're not basing their success on how well they can dodge bullets and shoot, which is a huge barrier to keep players from having fun. If you give players proximity mines from the get-go and they realize that they're getting a kill or two every once in a while, that's going to catapult their success and keep them engaged and interested at the same time. Right now, new players are currently unlocking things based on what they think could be cool, instead of what actually makes sense, both from a team play perspective and from what will help them start enjoying the game more. Too many people come to this channel asking about which weapons are the best, or what weapon they should spend their 1000 certifications on because they're almost there, they almost have enough. And what they tend not to understand is that weapons don't actually do a whole lot for you in most cases, but they're what feel the most substantial because you hold them in your hand, you shoot things with them, you get that feedback and ooh ah whatever. But if they drop those 1000 certifications into their ammo pack, their repair tool, their healing tool, they would be earning more experience and be a bigger benefit to the team. And they wouldn't have to ask those kinds of questions here because the certifications that they are earning would come by much more easily, just like it does for the vast majority of players who have spent years in the game. There's a tipping point somewhere around battle rank 30, and depending on what type of player you are, where you will have likely unlocked enough with a certain class so that each time you play it, you feel like you're on even ground with other players, because you're now at the point where any future improvements are somewhat negligible. But early on, it sucks to level and earn experience. So the point here would be to reduce the level of suckiness that the players have to deal with and bring them to that tipping point from day one, while at the same time encouraging them to grow and unlock and enjoy the game. That said, we should probably touch on the vehicle side of things as well. Much like how infantry loadouts are now currently on the live game while I'm talking, vehicles should get default loadouts as well. Just one, but with their first rank of free stuff that will make them somewhat viable from the start and help emphasize their role in the game. I do believe that vehicles are something you need to grow into as you advance as a player because they're not necessary to the game flow. They're pulled situationally. You can do most things as infantry, provided you actually have the tools, so it's good to have some room for exploration. At the same time, that's not an excuse for gimping vehicles as heavily as they are right now. Give all ESF engagement radar, give Valkyries squad spawn, give all main battle tanks rank 1 of their Empire specific ability, give Liberators and Flash ATVs rank 1 afterburner, and give Harassers, Lightnings, Galaxies, and Sunderers fire suppression. Then you give them all nanite auto repair and rank 1 zoom on all of their weapons. Are you going to win a 1v1 against someone who is all decked out? No, because the disparity in the vehicle game is atrocious, but at the same time, every vehicle in this game is useful in some capacity beyond a 1v1, and leaving room for growth, not to mention a huge cert sink later on in your career, is a very good thing. To switch topics a little bit, but still on the new player experience, one of the most annoying things that I still have to deal with, so I imagine that it'd be worse for new players, is joining an active squad only to find out that it's not actually being led by anyone. It's just a squad that's been orphaned by the previous leader, and a bunch of people are all scattered around all over the map, and it makes for a bad experience all around. When you come into the game and join a squad, you're expecting teamwork, you're expecting fun and this hoo-yah whatever, but that's not what you get the vast majority of the time. So within the current bounds of what you have access to, probably not a whole lot can be done about the orphan squads themselves. But what can be done is making those players fight more closely to one another, which will in turn create more interaction and potentially more cooperation, as players who see squad mates tend to glom onto one another while they're in the nearby area. The way to do this would be to change quick spawn once you're in a squad or platoon to always spawn at the closest location of your squad leader, instead of at the one that's closest to where you died. It's a small change, potentially huge payoff. Another seemingly minor but substantial change to the meta class would be to standardize the med tool's range at all ranks, and very specifically standardize its range. Because with a rank 1 med tool, you basically have to be humping a corpse in order to revive someone. This is the main thing that will get new players killed, because they are likely to have to expose themselves to enemy fire in order to be an asset to their team. The med tool already has plenty of benefits received per rank. Faster revive time, revive with more health, revive maxes with more health, heal allies more quickly. It doesn't need to also increase the range at which you can revive from in order to be a very desirable thing to rank up. So make the range at rank 1 the same as it is at max rank. You'll heal a lot of frustrations. The very last thing on the new player experience, and this is more of an experiment than anything else, but make all teleporter rooms into spawn points as well. Right now, most new players don't use the teleporters because they just don't know any better. And while yes, a lot of bases aren't exactly the most defensible things in the world, there are still many situations where teleporter rooms can be used to great effect. If you turned each of the teleporter rooms into a spawn point as well, it could drastically change the way that battles play out by getting more players to use that secondary spawn point, which in turn spreads forces around the base more. From what I've been told, this wouldn't be very difficult to implement, so it's definitely worth a try. So now let's really change gears here and talk about what more seasoned veterans need. I'm talking about the people who have been around for a year or two, the ones who are starting to lose or already have lost what little twinge of hope they had for the potential of the game. Maybe you can bring players back, maybe you can just respect and acknowledge and revitalize the game for the players who are still here, and to do that, the first thing would be to bring facility alerts back. Alerts are what still drive a lot of players, because there's a very legitimate goal at the end of a play session, and to many people, that's what's needed. Continent alerts are fine, but the goal is always the same, and because of that, the bases you'll be fighting at are usually the same as well. It gets very tiring. Also, think about what goes on during low pop hours, or on smaller servers where you're stuck on the same continent for hours on end. Give us the facility alerts back, and you'll shake things up quite a bit. There is something to be said about having too many alerts, however, as that can be just as annoying as doing the same one over and over and over, and the solution to that, I think, would be to limit how long the facility alerts are. So instead of 2 hours, consider just using 1 hour. It creates a little bit of a faster pace without intruding too much on the time that bigger alerts have to take place as well. The second thing is resource flow. I don't know if it's just something that you can plug and play now with a new system, but it's important and it plays into alerts as well, especially facility alerts. For those who don't know, because this is kind of an older feature, when a hex was cut off from the warp gate, as in if you can't follow the connected lattice links all the way back to the warp gate, then you wouldn't gain resources from that territory. PlanetSide 2 has since been changed to offer a single resource system that you earn no matter what, and individual territories no longer provide resources at all. It's just on all the time. So the solution would be that if you're currently fighting in a hex that does not have a lattice connection, then you don't gain resources at all. Attacking players would still gain resources so long as their adjacent hex still had a link back to their warp gate. Now the reason that this change is important is because it gives, at the very least, an illusion of master strategy in PlanetSide 2, and that's what platoon leaders not only desire, but it's also what they deserve, to make those sorts of plays that will win or lose them alerts. Make no mistake, platoon leaders are the smallest minority of the PlanetSide 2 player base, but they're also very, very valuable, because it's platoons that create or destroy the enjoyment of others. Think about when AOD, and sorry guys, you know I love you, but I'm going to use you as an example. When AOD decides to throw 4 platoons onto a hex, the people that are jammed back into the spawn room aren't having a good time anymore. Likewise, when other platoons decide to counter a big Zerg that's happening on a hex, suddenly everything is enjoyable for a lot more people. Lots of fighting where it would have usually just been a spawn room camp for X amount of minutes. That's why platoon leaders deserve to be able to play the strategy game, because they are the ones who create or destroy the fun fights in this game. Without squads, platoons, or organized outfits, this game would be an utter mess. The best part about this though is that not a whole lot changes for the casual player. They see that they can't do something that they want to do, and then they just go somewhere else. Or they see that, hey, this looks like a good time, and then they sit there and duke it out. They don't need to be aware of some grand strategy, because ultimately, that's not what they're there for. Lastly, and this is super important, at the end of a continent lock, immediately set all instant action locations to the most contested areas on the next continent. Right now, if you win an alert, you capture a continent, instant action just plops you down in the same spot, or the same continent. And because of that, it takes a lot of effort to redeploy, go to the next continent, and then instant action once I get there. Or if the continent is so dead, you jump into an ESF and then you start a ghost cap. That friction is a great way to get players to just log off instead of putting in the effort. But imagine if, as soon as you lose your continent, you hit your instant action button and boom, you're right back into the fight again. The next continent suddenly fills up, everything is crazy because everybody lands in the same spots, and the persistent experience is much better for it. This video is already much more lengthy than I thought it was going to be when I started writing the script, so it's probably a good place to just stop. So I think I'll do that. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel. And again, the point of this video was to make smaller changes that create larger impacts. So if you have any ideas on what you'd like to see to that end, feel free to leave those thoughts in the comment section down below. Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.